Let's say you open an AI tool and ask it something real about your business. And then the answer is so generic that you spend the next 10 minutes re-explaining and correcting it until it starts to feel like even more work than just doing it yourself. That's not AI being dumb. It's AI being a new hire that nobody's onboarded yet. You wouldn't give a new employee the keys and expect them to immediately know how to run your business, and AI is no different. I'm about to show you step by step how I would onboard AI to a business and then give you the exact kick to do it to yours for free. What's going on, guys? My name's Dylan. I'm a CPA, and the thing that I've learned over the past few months is it has never been easier to build a real AI system for your small business and customize it to exactly how you run things. In this video of the series, we're going to be giving Claude Cowork the foundation that everything else stands on. So as we eventually start connecting our tools and employing skills, we'll see how it all comes together to create some really powerful outcomes. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, Claude Cowork does require the desktop application. So if you go to claude.ai, and this is pretty self-explanatory. You can see here where you can create an account if you're new, and then you can download the desktop application here. All right, and once you're in, it'll look something like this. And I do want to mention that Claude Cowork does require a subscription. You can see it's unlocked here through the Pro plan. The Pro plan is plenty to follow along with what we're building out today, but whether you ever need to step up to the Max plan is ultimately a decision you have to make for yourself once you determine what your usage looks like. But for now, don't overthink it. Now, most of us know Claude and other AI models through the chat feature here, which is primarily what I've used in the past as well. But one of the primary differences is that the chat runs up in the cloud, which is Claude's environment. And it's essentially walled off from your computer. So Cowork here runs on your actual desktop. So when you want it to create an Excel file or update a Word document, you just point Cowork to where it is on your computer, and it can start updating the file directly. And we'll briefly touch on the models here because Claude does give you a few to pick from, and it's worth just a few seconds to understand the lineup. You can see the description for each here, but really the easiest way to think about it is fast and light on one end, and then heavy and powerful on the other. So Haiku is the quick one for simple stuff you want answered fast. To be honest, I do not use this model that often. And then Sonnet is your everyday workhorse. It handles most of what you throw at it, and it's probably the model you'll be using most often. And then Opus is the one you reach for when a task needs real reasoning, and that's what we'll be using in the setup today. But honestly, Sonnet would probably work just as fine. And lastly, there's Fable, which is Claude's most powerful model for the genuinely hard problems. Of course, the catch you're probably already aware of. The more powerful the model, the faster it eats up your usage. Opus burns through it much quicker than Sonnet, and Fable will actually soon sit in its own category. It's build pay-as-you-go on top of your plan, so think of it as a special occasion tool and not your daily driver. But honestly, for everything we're building in this series, Sonnet and Opus are really all you need, so don't worry about the rest for now. And then one last thing you'll notice right by the model picker is the effort setting. Basically how hard Claude thinks before it answers. And as you can see, there's a range here, but honestly, I just leave it on high and I don't really touch it. Worth knowing it's there, but not something you need to fiddle with today. So since Cowork works directly with the files on your computer, the first thing we need to do is actually point Claude to the folder we'll be working in. And if you're at all nervous about giving Claude direct access to your machine, we'll be handing Claude this folder and only this folder. So I'm going to click on Work in a Project or Folder, choose a folder, and then we're going to go ahead and create a new folder. So I'm going to be setting up a demo company that we'll be using throughout this series called Dylan's Catering Co. And we'll go ahead and open that folder. And as you can see, it explicitly asks here for permission to touch and edit the files within this folder. So it can edit the files in here, but it can't go touching anything else. Okay, so now that Claude can see this folder, the question now, of course, is what do we actually put in it? Or maybe a better question, how can we give Claude meaningful context to actually help shape its behavior? For instance, say you start to type out your company's core values, or maybe you share your founding story. Okay, but does Claude change the way it behaves because it now knows you were founded in 2019? Probably not. But instead of saying something like, we treat every client like family, what if I said, if we get an order wrong, we comp it in full and apologize, no nickel and diming? Well, now Claude has a much better direction on what to do when a customer has a complaint. So I built a context kit built exactly for this, which is to pull information out of you that'll actually have an impact on Claude's responses. It's really just a set of text files, otherwise known as markdown files, to give Claude a running start on knowing you and your business, and to prevent you from having to start with a blank page. And when we look at the structure of the kit, it really comes down to a few simple layers. First, your foundation. Claude getting to know who you are and what the business does. And then your rule sets, where you get to be more specific on how you actually operate day to day. And at the bottom, a couple of helper files to ensure that your context stays clean and relevant. And then sitting on top of all of it is the Claude MD file. So this is the one file that Claude is trained to read every single time by default. The Claude MD just points to the context files and opens one only when the task actually calls for it. That's a part of what makes the whole structure of this kit scalable, and we'll see that in action in the demo later on. Now, there's a bunch of these operating system file sets out there, and even Claude has a basic setup guide. But most of the ones I've seen are either a bit too general or are more geared towards personal productivity. So I wanted to create one for how a small business actually runs. Your clients, your money, the judgment calls you make every day. It's completely free. The link's in the description if you want to build alongside me. If not, that's totally fine. I'm actually about to walk through all the questions in the kit, so you could just freeform the answers with Claude yourself if you'd like. So the first thing I'm going to do is quite simply copy and paste all the files that came with the kit into the folder we just created. And then in Claude, I'm just going to say, please help set me up. And notice I'm not actually opening a single one of those files that I just dragged into that folder. That's actually the whole beauty of Cowork. Claude reads the setup file that came with my kit, starts interviewing me, and then based on my responses, it'll update those files directly. So the first question here is really the one that frames everything after it, which is what kind of business is this? Sounds straightforward, and it is, but your answer here tells Claude which questions are even worth asking. So as I've already mentioned, I'm setting up my catering company, so I'll go ahead and select that one. As you can see at the top right, we now start working our way through the checklist that Claude has created for itself. And the first one here is capturing who we are. Before Claude can help your business, it's got to know the person running it, what you're chasing, what you're protecting, maybe what's nagging at you and the lines you just won't cross. One of the first questions really relates to the goals that you have for the company. So if you were to indicate that you're trying to grow your company aggressively, that framing could completely reshape Claude's suggestions for you versus saying something like, I'm trying to protect my time and my weekends. This is intentionally left open-ended when it comes to time frame. Personally, I find it helpful to focus on the next 90 days, and then I revisit, and it actually helps me remain accountable as well. But you might prefer to indicate what you're working toward for the whole year, or maybe you can do both short-term and long-term. There's really no wrong answer here, just do what you think will help you. Now I do like this question here, and it's essentially asking what our standards are. So there are some suggestions here, but if I were to reply directly and say something like, we want every customer to be treated fairly, you can see that there's a rule baked into the kit that makes Claude slightly push back. Because it asks here, what does that make you actually do? And then it gives you some more examples. So that's forcing exactly what we keep talking about, which is capture the behavior, not the slogan. And so after I answer all the questions, it condenses everything into a nice little summary here. So I'm going to say this looks good, and we can move on to the next one. So now we move to the business itself. So what do you do? Who does the work? What does your clientele look like, and how does the money flow? Maybe things that are quite obvious to you, but nonetheless integral to sharing with Claude, so that it always understands the environment that your company is living in. So the first question it asks is, do you have a website? If so, you can just drop in your URL here, and it'll actually create a draft of everything it can find on your website first, and then you can just correct it and fill in the gaps as needed. Before we start filling this section out, it's important to find the balance between directional guidance and offering every single detail about your company. I've seen the temptation of trying to get extremely granular so that Claude nails it every single time, but that can actually be a trap. What that creates is now you have to constantly update your context for every single change. And then you start second guessing on whether it's current or not. And pretty soon it's just a chore you abandon. But the opposite problem is just as real, as we've been discussing. If your business context just says, I run a catering company, then Claude can't do much with that. So everyone's going to be a little different in terms of where they land on that spectrum. All right, so I've populated the business context. You can see my answers here. And I'm going to say this looks good, so we can move on to the next one. So the last of the 3 foundation files asks about your tools. In other words, what applications do you use to run every facet of your business? So your money and books, any CRMs, how you communicate, time management, and so on. But the tools file is not just there to tell Claude what you're connected to. It can actually do that live on its own. It's really telling Claude how you use each tool and what to ignore. As you probably know, there's so many tools and applications out there, and many of them overlap. QuickBooks, for instance, has both payroll and bookkeeping functionality, but you may just use the bookkeeping piece there and then use something else for payroll. And so this is a file that says which one wins and which one to not even look at. Because as we eventually start connecting to some of these applications, just that one sentence can save Claude from pulling information out of the wrong place entirely. And so here's the summary of tools that I've set up for the demo company. And again, the important part here is being really specific about how you use each application. All right, so that's the foundation. But now we move to the rule sets, which have a slightly different agenda. My kit comes with 3 of these, and these are essentially the files where you can get a little bit more specific about the different angles of your business. So the business rules one provides a place to define how you actually operate day to day. And the writing rules capture how you sound, so drafts come out looking like you wrote them. And lastly, design rules capture your visual style for content creation and marketing. Now, all of these are completely optional. A contractor, for instance, may not need design rules because they don't do any marketing. That's fine. But what really matters is the concept behind them. Each rule set is meant to capture one specific part of your business, so that whenever Claude takes on a task that touches that area, it knows to pull those rules in and apply them. Again, fill in what would genuinely change Claude for you, and then skip or delete the rest, add new ones over time. And remember, when you're done, it should look like your business, not my template. I do want to give you one tip that makes filling them out way easier, which is the more context you have just lying around about your business, the less of it you have to create from scratch. For instance, for the writing rules, I recognize it's actually kind of difficult to describe how you sound. So a better way is just to let Claude analyze your writing itself. And as you can see, my kit actually suggests this. So if I just drag in a few of the emails that I've recently sent, it can help define my voice for me. And you can see here all the data it got from reading those emails, and I can tweak this even further to my liking. And similarly with the design file, if you already have marketing materials, just drop those into Claude and it can analyze your visual style. The point I'm trying to make is don't overcomplicate it, and also don't feel like every answer is permanent. Think of all these files as living documents that you update and tweak over time as you work more with Claude. We have all of our basic context in place, so let's say a company called Lumen emails us about catering their company holiday. Since we're not directly connected to our email yet, I'm going to create a folder called Lumen Quote, and then I'm going to drag the email we just received into that folder. And since I just created a folder within Dylan's catering code, now I can just say something like, okay, I just created a folder called Lumen Quote. I dropped the email from them in there. It's essentially a lead that came in about catering their company holiday party. Can you help me create a quote for them? Start with something that actually fits what they're after in the email, the dinner buffet and all of that, and then try to land it near the budget they mentioned in the email. And they did say they might creep up to 65 or so people, so maybe note what that would look like as well. And then on the second page, if you could lay out my current rates, I've uploaded an Excel file with the most current rates in the same folder, so you can pull the numbers from there. And then once everything looks right, turn the whole thing into a nice clean PDF that I can actually send them, and then draft me an email to go along with that. I love how I can just start kind of rambling at Claude and it's still so good at picking up exactly what I'm asking for. All right, so it just finished, and here you can see the PDF of the quote, and it actually looks pretty good. I think there's a couple of things here and there that I would tweak. One thing I'm noticing as I'm actually reading through all of this is that the wording is extremely specific and customized to the initial email from the lead. So overall, not bad. Here's the email that I also asked it to create, and it looks pretty good as well. And then at the last second, I pointed it to an Excel file that had all of my current rates. And then it was able to read that and convert it to a nice looking second page here with all of my up-to-date pricing. And it also, of course, used that pricing to get close to the $6,000 budget that the initial email asked for. And who knows, maybe I'll decide to turn that Excel file into a permanent part of my context if I plan on doing this often. So quite a short, simple demo here, especially since we're not connected to any of our applications. But what I really want to show you is what's happening behind the scenes. So if we remember the Claude MD, it's doing its job well here because it's pulling all of the relevant context into this conversation. So I asked it to draft an email. Well, Claude MD pointed it to the writing rules so that the email to Lumen was written in my voice. And then I asked it to create a clean PDF. I read the design rules to ensure that it applied the correct colors, fonts, and overall style of my business. And then you can see on the quote here that it even knew to have a 50% deposit because I had defined that in my business rules. So is it going to nail everything you throw at it the first time, every time? Of course not. But in a matter of a few minutes, I have something that gets me 80% of the way there. Now I could fine tune my context to get it closer to what I want next time, or maybe I just need to make a few tweaks myself. I think it's important to understand that AI is not here to completely replace you. It's here to supplement. And you and your judgment still have a huge part to play in all of this. So that brings us to the last two files in the kit, and I like to call them the helper files because they have more of a supporting role. The first one is the memory.md, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because I do think it's pretty self-explanatory. But this is essentially a catch-all where Claude can jot down specific nuances about you and how you work, and other things that just might not fit neatly into one of the main context files. So this isn't something you populate at the outset. These are more things that come up naturally over time as you work more with Claude. The second helper file is the audit.md, and this one's important because as your context evolves and changes, there will invariably be noise, perhaps even contradictory context, that needs to be cleaned up. And this is the context pollution I alluded to earlier. The more you let this build up over time, the less reliable Claude can be. So to combat that, maybe once a month or even once a quarter, you just say audit my setup, and Claude will do a cleanup pass. This is how you keep your context intentional and relevant. And it's also a way for yourself to get realigned with your own priorities and goals. So if you take one mindset away from this whole video, make it this. This kit is a starting point, not a finished product. Add to it, delete what doesn't fit, and make it yours a little at a time. In the demo here, I'm running a catering service. So, maybe I care about venue logistics, or I don't know, a rule set specifically for how I set my menus. But that's the domain of my company, and no off-the-shelf kit's gonna have that. The kit is just handing you the structure. It's your expertise that makes it yours. And I keep going back to the analogy of a new hire. You can't expect somebody to come in and immediately know everything about your business, and you can't expect that with Claude either. So don't try to get it perfect overnight. It's something that has to compound over time the more you work with Claude. So again, the kit's free in the description below. I hope you found this video helpful. It's literally the first video I've ever published, so still trying to figure all this out. But if you have any questions, feel free to comment on the video, or you can even shoot me an email through my website. And I'd love to understand how you're using AI at your company and help you out any way I can. So I hope to see you in the next video where we start to put some of this context to work by connecting to the various tools and applications that run our business. See you there.